For 15 years, I convinced myself that love meant sacrifice, until the day his words started coming from someone else's mouth. A bird, locked in a cage, repeating every insult he ever threw at me. Yesterday, with shaking hands and a heart that had nothing left to give, I opened that cage door. The whispers are gone now, and all that's left is silence. I sat in my car for 47 minutes after I did it, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, tears silently streaming down my face. All those years of his words cutting me open, echoing in that house, in that innocent creature's voice. For 15 years I endured it, thinking love meant sacrifice. Then yesterday, with shaking hands and a hollow chest, I opened the cage door while he was at work. The whispers are gone now. The silence is deafening. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who would do something so desperate. When I look back now, trying to pinpoint where everything unraveled, I can't find a single moment. It was more like watching a sweater slowly come apart, one loose thread, then another, until suddenly you're holding nothing but tangled yarn in your hands. My relationship with my partner wasn't always broken. We met in our late 20s, both of us carrying our own baggage but hopeful about building something together. The first 2 years were beautiful, the kind of love story you'd see in movies, where two damaged people somehow make each other whole. We moved in together after 8 months, bought our first home at the 2-year mark. I remember the day we got the keys, how we danced through empty rooms, our laughter bouncing off bare walls. That was also the week he brought home the bird. "It's just until my cousin gets back on his feet," he explained, setting the large brass cage in our sunroom. 3 months, tops. The bird, a blue and gold macaw with intelligent eyes that seemed to track my every movement, had belonged to his cousin, who was going through a divorce and staying in an apartment that didn't allow pets. I didn't mind at first. I'd never had a bird before, but I liked animals well enough. I had no idea that the creature perched inside those metal bars would become both a witness and a weapon in the slow destruction of everything I held dear. The 3 months came and went. His cousin moved into a new place but conveniently never had enough space for the bird. My partner had grown attached by then, spending hours teaching it new phrases, whistling to it, sharing his breakfast toast across the table. I didn't push the issue. It made him happy, and I was still caught in that phase where his happiness was somehow more important than my own. The warning signs were there from the beginning. His sudden mood shifts, the way minor inconveniences would spiral him into rage, how he could be laughing one minute and slamming doors the next. But there were always explanations. Stress at work, childhood trauma he was working through, medication adjustments. I became an expert at making excuses for him, both to others and to myself. The first time he called me worthless, we were arguing about something trivial, a dinner party I wanted to host that he didn't. In the heat of the argument, it just slipped out. "You're fucking worthless sometimes, you know that." I remember how the room seemed to freeze, how my breath caught in my throat. He apologized immediately, of course. Tears in his eyes, voice breaking, swearing it would never happen again. I believed him because I needed to, because the alternative meant admitting I had made a terrible mistake. 3 days later, as I was watering the plants in the sunroom, the bird tilted its head at me and said, clear as day, "Worthless." Then again, "Worthless, worthless." I dropped the watering can. People don't tell you how abuse calcifies over time, how it hardens into something you carry around inside your chest. A weight that becomes so familiar, you forget what it felt like to breathe without it. They don't tell you how your brain will rewire itself to normalize the abnormal, how your thresholds for pain will stretch and expand, until you are enduring things you once thought unimaginable. The bird became my partner's confidant in a strange way. When he was home alone, he would talk to it for hours, venting about work, about me, about life. I discovered this accidentally one day when I came home early from a canceled appointment and heard him through the open window of the sunroom. He was telling the bird about how I never understood him, how I was just like his mother, how sometimes he wanted to just disappear. The bird soaked it all up like a sponge. Its vocabulary expanded to include not just the explicit insults my partner would occasionally hurl during arguments, but the subtle jabs as well, always nagging, never satisfied. So emotional. By our 5th year together, the bird had compiled a greatest hits album of my partner's contempt, playing it back at random intervals throughout the day. I would be making dinner, and suddenly, can't do anything right. I would be reading on the couch, always complaining. Watering the plants, nobody else would want you. When I confronted my partner about it, he would laugh it off. "It's just a bird," he'd say. "It doesn't know what it's saying." But there was always something in his eyes when the bird would repeat these things. A flicker of satisfaction, as though he had found a way to keep his words lingering in the air long after he had stopped speaking them. I started spending less time at home. I volunteered for extra shifts at work, joined a book club, took the long way home from everywhere. The less time I spent in that house, the less I had to hear those words bounced back at me from behind bright feathers and a curved beak. But avoidance is never a permanent solution. Eventually, you have to come home. The irony wasn't lost on me that while my partner's verbal abuse was intermittent, coming in waves during arguments or bad days, the bird's was constant. It had no concept of appropriate timing or context. It might spew vitriol while we were hosting friends for dinner, causing awkward silences and concerned glances. It might wake me at 5 a.m. with a cheerful, useless bitch as I stumbled to the bathroom. My friends started asking questions. "Why does your bird say those things?" They'd ask, uncomfortable laughter trailing their words. I became skilled at deflection. "Oh, he picks up the TV," I'd say. Or, "He lived with a college fraternity before us." The lies came easily because the truth was too shameful to speak aloud. I was living with two abusers, one with malice, one without, but both equally effective at destroying my sense of self. 7 years in, I hit a wall. Not literally, though there had been times when my partner's anger made me fear that possibility. No, this was the emotional wall, the moment when something inside you simply says, "No more." It happened on an ordinary Tuesday. I had taken a personal day from work, something I rarely did because being home alone with the bird was its own special kind of torture. But I had a migraine that wouldn't quit, and the thought of staring at a computer screen for 8 hours was unbearable. My partner had left for work hours earlier. The house was quiet, except for the occasional rustle from the sunroom, where the bird's cage sat. I was lying on the couch with a cold compress over my eyes when I heard it start. Stupid. Stupid. That and stupid. These were words from a particularly vicious fight we'd had the week before, when I'd accidentally shrunk one of his expensive sweaters in the wash. He had been drinking. He was drinking more and more those days, and his anger had escalated quickly from irritation to full-blown rage. "Fat and stupid and worthless," the bird continued, its voice an uncanny mimicry of my partner's alcohol-slurred speech. "Nobody would miss you." Something snapped inside me. I tore the compress from my eyes and stormed into the sunroom. The bird was pacing back and forth on its perch, seeming almost excited by my entrance, as though eager to perform for an audience. "Shut up," I whispered, then louder. "Shut up." The bird tilted its head, regarding me with one glassy eye. "Nobody would miss you," it repeated. I stood there, trembling, tears streaming down my face, screaming at a bird who couldn't possibly understand what it was doing to me. In that moment, I hated it with a passion that frightened me. I hated my partner, too, for turning this creature into a repository for his cruelty. Most of all, I hated myself for allowing this to continue for so long. When my partner came home that evening, I told him the bird had to go. "It's me or the bird," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I can't do this anymore." He looked at me as though I had suggested we set the house on fire. "You're being ridiculous," he said. "It's just a bird." "It's not just a bird," I countered. "It's like living with a recording of every horrible thing you've ever said to me, playing on random shuffle all day long." We fought for hours. He accused me of being oversensitive, of trying to control him, of creating drama where there was none. The pattern was familiar. My pain minimized, my concerns dismissed, my reality denied. In the middle of the argument, as if on cue, the bird chimed in. "Always making problems. Always making problems." My partner had the audacity to laugh. I packed a bag that night and stayed with a friend. For 3 days, I experienced what it was like to exist in a space where no one called me names, where no one's moods dictated the emotional temperature of the room, where no feathered creature regurgitated abuse at random intervals. On the 4th day, I went home. Not because anything had been resolved, but because I had nowhere else to go long term. My friend's sympathy had an expiration date, and I knew it. Besides, I still loved him, the man underneath the anger, the person I believed he could be if he just tried harder, drank less, got help. The cycle continued. Bad fights followed by tender reconciliations. Promises made and broken. The bird's vocabulary expanding with each new insult. each new argument. My self-esteem eroding like a shoreline under constant waves. I suggested therapy, both couples and individual. My partner went twice, then stopped, claiming the therapist was biased against him. I continued going alone. Weekly sessions where I unpacked the carnage of my relationship, while my therapist gave me concerned looks and gently suggested resources for people in abusive relationships. I'm not being abused, I would insist. He just has a temper. He's working on it. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was being abused, not just by him, but by this bizarre proxy he had created, this animal that had become a living, breathing archive of his contempt. 10 years into our relationship, things reached a strange equilibrium. My partner's outbursts became less frequent but more intense when they did occur. I became more skilled at avoiding his triggers and making myself small and unobtrusive. The bird continued its role as unwitting tormentor, though by this point I had learned to tune it out most of the time. Then came the pandemic. Suddenly, we were both working from home, trapped together in the space that had become a minefield of painful memories and ongoing tension. The bird seemed to thrive on the increased audience, performing its repertoire of insults with renewed enthusiasm. My partner's drinking escalated during lockdown. What had once been a weekend indulgence became a nightly ritual, then an all-day affair. With alcohol came the rage, more consistent now, more difficult to predict or prevent. One night, after he had passed out on the couch, I sat alone in the kitchen, nursing a glass of wine and contemplating how I had ended up here. I had a master's degree. I had once been described as vivacious, confident, full of potential. Now I was a shadow, moving carefully through my own home, constantly braced for verbal assault from either human or avian sources. The bird had been unusually quiet that evening. As if sensing my thoughts, it suddenly spoke from its corner. Your fault, all your fault. Those weren't my partner's words, at least not ones I remembered him saying. It struck me then that the bird might be creating its own combinations now, mixing and matching the phrases it had learned over the years into new forms of torment. Something cold and resolved settled in my chest. I couldn't leave, not yet anyway. Financial entanglement, the housing market, the pandemic, all practical obstacles. But I could remove one source of pain. The plan formed slowly, incrementally, a whisper in the back of my mind that grew louder with each passing day. I researched bird care obsessively, learning about foods that were toxic to them, about respiratory sensitivities, about accidents that commonly befell pet birds. I felt like Lady Macbeth, plotting in the shadows of my own home. The guilt was overwhelming at times. The bird was innocent, after all, a victim of circumstance just as I was. It had no understanding of the pain it caused me, no malicious intent behind its mimicry. But rational thought had long since departed. In my mind, the bird had become the physical manifestation of my partner's abuse, a constant reminder of my failure to protect myself, to demand better treatment, to leave when I should have. Weeks passed as I contemplated various scenarios. I considered simply releasing it, but the guilt of imagining it trying to survive in an environment it wasn't adapted for stopped me. I thought about accidentally leaving a window open near its cage, but our windows had screens. In the end, it was my partner who provided the opportunity. 13 years into our relationship, he announced he had to go out of town for a week for work, his first business trip since before the pandemic. I nodded and helped him pack, hiding the relief that flooded through me at the thought of 7 days without his volatile presence. As he pulled out of the driveway, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time in years, I would have the house to myself. No walking on eggshells, no monitoring his alcohol consumption, no bracing for sudden mood shifts. Just me and the bird. The first 2 days after my partner left, I did nothing. I basked in quiet, slept in the middle of the bed, watched shows he would have ridiculed me for enjoying. The bird continued its commentary, but without my partner there to react to it, to smirk or nod or add his own fresh insults. The words seemed to lose some of their power. On the third day, I called in sick to work. I spent the morning in a strange, detached state, moving through the house as though in a dream. I fed the bird its breakfast as usual, changed its water, spoke to it in the gentle voice I used when my partner wasn't around. "It's not your fault," I told it as it preened its feathers. "You never asked to be part of this." The bird looked at me with those intelligent eyes and said, "Stupid bitch." My resolve hardened. That afternoon, I opened all the windows in the sunroom. I removed the screens first, carefully setting them aside in the garage where they wouldn't be noticed missing right away. It was early spring, The air outside crisp but not cold. I made sure the bird's cage door was securely latched before I left the room. I spent the rest of the day in a fog of anxiety and anticipation. Every time I walked past the sunroom, I checked to make sure the windows were still open, that the bird was still safely in its cage. I waited for nightfall. Around midnight, when the neighborhood was quiet and dark, I returned to the sunroom. The bird was asleep, its head tucked under its wing. I stood watching it for a long time, tears streaming silently down my face. "I'm sorry," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I meant it. With trembling hands, I unlatched the cage door and swung it wide open. Then I turned off the lights and left the room, closing the door behind me. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening for sounds from the sunroom. Would the bird notice the open cage door? Would it venture out? Would it find its way to the open windows? Or would it stay put, comfortable in its familiar prison? Morning came with no answers. I approached the sunroom cautiously, heart pounding in my chest. When I opened the door, I was greeted by an empty cage, its door still hanging open. The windows remained as I had left them, wide open to the spring air. The bird was gone. I sank to the floor, overwhelmed by a complex wave of emotions. Relief, guilt, grief, and something else I couldn't quite name. Freedom, perhaps. Or maybe just the hollow emptiness that comes after committing an act you can never take back. I spent the next few hours staging the scene. I closed the windows but left one slightly ajar, as though it hadn't been properly latched and had blown open in the night. I put the screens back on all but that one window. I made sure the cage door looked like it might have been jarred open accidentally. Then I called my partner. "Something terrible has happened," I said, injecting panic in my voice. "The bird is gone." His reaction was everything I had anticipated: shock, anger, accusation. He cut his trip short and drove home that same day, arriving late in the evening with wild eyes and alcohol on his breath. "How could you let this happen?" he demanded, pacing the sunroom like a caged animal himself. "You never liked him. Did you do this on purpose?" I let the tears come then, real tears born from genuine guilt mixed with fear of discovery. "How can you say that? It was an accident. The window, the cage, I don't know how it happened." He searched the neighborhood for hours that night, calling the bird's name into the darkness. I watched from the window, a strange numbness spreading through me. I knew the bird wouldn't be found. It was either miles away by now or, more likely, already fallen prey to local predators. My partner didn't speak to me for days afterward. He put up flyers, called animal control, posted in neighborhood forums online. He drank more heavily than ever, his grief manifesting as rage directed squarely at me. But, for the first time in years, the house was quiet. No echoed insults, no mimicked contempt. Just silence and the palpable weight of what I had done. They say the truth will set you free, but some truths are cages of their own. In the weeks following the bird's escape, I carried my secret like a stone in my stomach, heavy, immovable, gradually wearing me down from the inside. My partner's grief eventually gave way to resignation. The flyers came down, the cage was moved to the basement, the sunroom repurposed into a home office. But the atmosphere between us had shifted irreparably. He blamed me for the bird's disappearance, even if he never directly accused me again. I could see it in his eyes whenever he looked at me: suspicion, resentment, a question never quite formed into words. Ironically, the bird's absence seemed to take something vital from our relationship, as though that constant reminder of his cruelty had somehow been the glue holding us together, the externalization of a dynamic too toxic to exist solely between two people. His verbal abuse continued, of course, but now there was no echo, no amplification. Just words that hung in the air for a moment before dissolving into silence. Somehow, this made them easier to recognize for what they were. Without the bird repeating them back to me at random intervals, they lost their power to infiltrate my subconscious, to become truths I internalized. I started therapy again, this time with a new counselor who specialized in domestic abuse. I didn't tell her what I had done to the bird. Some secrets are too dark to speak aloud, but I told her everything else. The years of verbal degradation, the alcohol, the isolation, the fear. "What you're describing is abuse," she said firmly during our second session. "You understand that, right?" I nodded, the words settling into me with strange relief. Abuse. Not a rough patch. Not a communication problem. not a series of unfortunate arguments. Abuse. Naming it gave me strength. I started making plans, quiet, careful plans that I kept hidden from my partner. I opened a separate bank account and began transferring small amounts that wouldn't be noticed. I reconnected with friends I had gradually lost touch with over the years. I researched apartments in a city 2 hours away, where I had been offered a job transfer. 15 years after we had first met, 14 years after the bird had entered our lives, and 4 months after I had set it free, I left my partner. I waited until he was at work, packed 2 suitcases with essentials, and walked out the front door without looking back. I left a note on the kitchen counter. Not explaining, not apologizing, just informing. I've left. Don't try to find me. Simple. Direct. Die. Final. Dot. He called dozens of times that first day. Left voicemails that evolved from confusion to anger to pleading. I listened to each one, my finger hovering over the delete button, something like pity welling in my chest. He sounded genuinely shocked, genuinely hurt by my departure, as though he had no idea why someone might want to escape him. Perhaps he didn't. Perhaps in his mind, our relationship had been normal. Perhaps he didn't remember all the cruel words, or didn't recognize their impact. Perhaps the bird had been the only one truly paying attention all those years. I changed my number the next day, filed for divorce the week after, moved into my new apartment with nothing but those 2 suitcases, and began the slow process of rebuilding a life that was wholly my own. It's been 2 years since I left. 2 years of therapy, of nightmares, of jumping when someone raises their voice. 2 years of learning how to exist as an individual, rather than as an appendage to someone else's volatility. I still think about the bird sometimes. I wonder if it survived that first night of freedom. I wonder if it found its way to a park or a forest, if it managed to adapt to life outside a cage. I wonder if it ever stops repeating those words it learned in our home, if birds can forget the way people sometimes can't. The guilt never fully disappears. Not just for the bird, but for staying so long, for allowing myself to be diminished year after year, for not being stronger sooner. My therapist tells me that guilt is a useless emotion unless it leads to changed behavior. You can't undo the past, she says. You can only learn from it. So I learn. I volunteer at a domestic violence shelter 1 evening a week. I speak at support groups occasionally, sharing my story, though never the part about the bird. That remains my darkest secret, the line I crossed that I can never uncross. Last month, I ran into a mutual friend who told me my ex-partner has gotten sober. He's in a 12-step program, doing the work, making amends to people he's hurt. For a moment, I waited for the familiar twist of anxiety in my gut, the urge to make excuses for him, to minimize my own experience. It didn't come. I hope it sticks, I said simply, and meant it. I don't hate him anymore. I don't love him either. He exists in my mind now as a cautionary tale, a lesson learned at tremendous cost. Sometimes, in the quiet of my new apartment, I think I hear phantom echoes of the bird's voice, those cruel words in that cheerful tone. But it's just memory playing tricks, the way trauma embeds itself in your nervous system, waiting to be triggered. The real whispers now come from within, my own voice, gradually growing stronger, drowning out the others. You are enough, it says. You are worthy. You are free. And day by day, I'm learning to believe it. We can't unhear the whispers that have shaped us. We can't undo the damage of years spent in the company of cruelty. But we can choose which voices we carry forward. We can decide which words deserve space in our minds, in our hearts, in the stories we tell ourselves about who we are. I chose freedom for the bird, and finally, for myself. The cage doors are open now. And despite everything, despite the guilt and the grief and the years I can never get back, I'm learning to fly.